I've pondered many mysteries standing in a river, how it can be ever-changing and eternal all at once. How, in 1992, a lone sockeye salmon named Larry could swim 900 miles up a river right here outside of town, to go home to spawn alone, without a mate to spawn with. How somebody could chug 12 beers and think that this river is the perfect place to throw all the empties. Still pondering that one. I fell in love with wild salmon when I was 2. I have memories around 10. My dad standing next to me in the boat at first light, and the purple of the king salmon's side arcing toward me as I was drawing it into the net, and the look on my dad's face as he watched me do it. And later, the smell on my hands like metallic sweet grass. And that night, my family, chattering happily with lemons, mustard smudges on their faces, and the taste of the ocean in the orange flesh of the salmon. No one really knows why you're called to a river. But I took to it early on. My dad brought me into fishing, and I was easily hooked. But for me, it was about the experience. The mist coming off the river in the morning, the hot cocoa, then the coffee. Early morning from the thermos. But most of all, it was the connection with my dad, with my brother, and with this holy being that comes to us from the sea under the surface of the water. And a connection to that through a thin rod and a thin line that directly connects me to it. To this mysterious creature that comes back to us to create new life over and over and over again. I wanted to connect to that. And for a time I did. And then I lost that connection. And I nearly lost my own life. And in the end, it was that same mysterious creature that called me back to life. And that's why now and forevermore I will sing their song. So, I spent my 20s as a wilderness fishing guide in Southeast Alaska. I got paid to fish for salmon. Let me repeat that. I got paid to fish for salmon. Dream job. Something changed in me, though, during this time. I slowly transformed from somebody that needed to possess and dominate all these salmon as they came to me, one after the other, and I saw thousands of them. I started thanking every fish that came into my boat. I actually did this. You could ask my oft-bewildered guests as they were standing next to me, what the hell is this guy doing? But I did because I developed this holy reverence for these things. And as this went on, and towards the end of that part of my career, all I wanted to do was figure out a way to save the remnant runs that remain. But I just didn't know how. So flash forward to 2014, and I'm now ensconced in my career as a storyteller and as a filmmaker. And I spent 4 years working on this story that's my best version of a love story for wild salmon. It was the best I could do at the time, and it's what I needed to do. And during all this time, I tried to come up with a call to action to tell people to do something that would make a difference to help save wild salmon. And so, at the end of it all, on a particular Tuesday, with no fanfare whatsoever, it just kind of came to me and floated in the window. In order to save wild salmon, we need to eat them. I know what you're thinking. Why would you kill something that you want to save? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'll get there, I promise. Beyond a spiritual, physical, and emotional and cultural virtue that all these wild salmon bring to us, they're just plain cool. They're shaped like a bullet of muscle and teeth and blood, and they're shaped perfectly, absolutely perfectly to survive and make their way down the river streams from their natal streams where they come from, to make it out into the ocean and swim with powerful tail thrusts, clear out in this great ellipse of we don't even know how far yet. We haven't even tracked that, and we don't have a way to track that. All the way to arrive back at their river, their natal river where they came from, after they've gone through an entire gauntlet of whales and otters and sea lions and nets and fishermen like me, and sometimes like Larry, to make it 900 miles clear back up to the same spot, the exact spot they were born, to spawn and die and give life to new salmon and new things and new creatures, to 137 different creatures. Their shape has given them the ability to survive ice ages, volcanic eruptions, even cataclysmic floods. But will it give them the ability to survive us? Because what we do to salmon, we do to ourselves. Bristol Bay, Alaska is the site of the last largest wild salmon migration in the world. It's also site to one of the largest open pit copper mines. It's the largest deposit of copper actually in North America. The Pebble Limited Partnership is a Canadian corporation that has been trying for many years to extract this copper from this place, which is seated in the headwaters of where these salmon go to spawn. If this went through, it would require a tailings dam 700 feet high, that's as tall as the Space Needle in Seattle, to hold back toxic material forever. So, about the time I was taking this salmon love movie out into the world, the United States EPA spent 3 years doing a watershed assessment to try to tell whether a mine the size and scope of the Pebble Mine could coexist with a fishery like that in Bristol Bay. After 3 years of a scientific assessment, they decided it could not. And that offered protection for Bristol Bay. When we ask these questions of ourselves, do we want to survive? Do we want to perpetuate the survival of wild salmon in order to save ourselves? I've had to ask that question of myself. See, because I took to drinking early on. After the hot cocoa, after the coffee. I took to drinking alcohol. At first, it was a rite of passage. It was a way to fit in. It was a way to celebrate, go to school. Eventually, it became a constant companion. It became a way to grieve and deal with growing anxiety and depression. And at the end, it became a way for me to simply keep existing. This all culminated in 2016. In the first part of November that year, I found out in the span of 5 days that my mom was diagnosed with cancer. My grandmother, Dorothy, headed into hospice, and I knew she was dying. Our nation elected a new president, and for me, brought a lot of fear and uncertainty. And I lost my connection to the starlight of the universe and my connection to these wild beings that really transformed me as a young person. And this began a downward spiral for me. About a year ago, the newly appointed head of the United States EPA met in a closed-door meeting with the president and CEO of the Pebble Limited Partnership. 1 hour after this meeting, the entire EPA was instructed to stand down on protections from Bristol Bay. I felt helpless and hopeless. At this point, I was drinking daily to obliterate my feelings of sadness, and I didn't know where to turn. And after 6 months of this, I finally hit the bottom. 3 days after that meeting, and 3 days after burying my grandmother, Dorothy, I checked myself into a hospital and asked the people inside to save my life. And without them, and subsequently the people that loved me enough when I couldn't love myself, I wouldn't be here speaking to you today. After I left the hospital alive, I found a love in and for my wife that I never knew was possible, for the depth she seemed to be able to love and care for me through all of this. And for her and for those people that love me, I'm forever grateful. Wild salmon have transformed me. They called me to face my fear. And in so doing, now I want to know how I can pay it forward to them, how I can share it with you, and in turn, how you can share it with the rest of the world. We can start by cleaning up the rivers we fouled here in the lower 48. I mean, there's a lot of them. The Elwha River in Washington State is a beautiful example of how this can be done. 2 dams that were no longer useful were taken out and opened up hundreds of miles of, 70 miles to be precise, not quite hundreds, but 70 miles of pristine salmon country. I will personally pick up all the beer cans in as many rivers as I can find. But what we must do, and what is most important, is protect the wild systems that remain, the wild systems like the 8 beautiful wild salmon rivers in Bristol Bay, Alaska. And in order to protect them, we need to eat wild salmon. And I know this seems just so counterintuitive. Again, why would you kill something that you want to save? But here's what we know. Wild salmon need clean, cold, clear rivers in order to make new babies and perpetuate life. And if they do that, if we keep those rivers healthy, and if we keep demanding a fishery like exists in Bristol Bay, Alaska, that is managed absolutely perfectly, and we keep demanding wild salmon on our plates, we'll demand the habitat sufficient for those wild salmon to keep coming to our plates and feeding us body and soul forever. This can be done. We need wild salmon. We need them to connect to that thing which is bigger than ourselves. We need them to connect to the things that are sacred in ourselves that we don't see every day. We need them to connect to each other. And if we do that and we eat wild salmon together in this way, it's the most holy form of sacrament I can think of. We're taking those nutrients from the ocean into ourselves and we're sharing them in community. And that is a way of finding peace, and that is a way of coming together. And I can say with great joy and gratitude that today my mom is cancer-free, and it's been almost a year I've been sober and in recovery. And I'm so grateful for these wild beings from the other side that have brought me there. And now we're going to watch just a few images that really kind of help tell the story for me about what these creatures are. Standing in a river brings more questions than answers many days. But the answers are shrouded in mystery. And that river is eternal, and it keeps flowing through us. And if we wait for them, those answers will come. What I've learned is that for me, wild salmon are the way, shape, and form of life. And I choose to live. Thank you.